My name is Leah, and I am 32 years old. At 8:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed against the granite countertop. It wasn't a greeting. It was an eviction notice from my own mother. "We changed the locks on the lake house," the text read. "We no longer trust you." The timestamp showed it arrived exactly 3 minutes after my automatic transfer of $2,000 had cleared their account. Before I could even process the audacity, a notification popped up from my sister, Brooke. A photo of her, smiling in the living room I paid for, with the caption, "Finally, a sanctuary without negative energy. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I didn't throw the phone against the wall. I didn't scream into a pillow. Those reactions belong to people who still believe their grief might change the outcome. I didn't have that luxury. Instead, I opened my laptop and clicked on a file I had named, with zero sense of irony, the family trust. It wasn't a legal document. It was a spreadsheet, a forensic accounting of my own stupidity. I sat in my 600-square-foot apartment, the air smelling faintly of the generic instant noodles I ate 4 nights a week. I looked around at the furniture I had scavenged from thrift stores. The coffee table with the wobbly leg. The curtains I had hemmed myself because custom ones cost too much. I lived like a college student so that my parents could live like retirees with a pension they never earned. 400 miles away, they were currently drinking wine on a deck that my overtime pay had built, looking out over a lake I was now barred from visiting. I scrolled back to the beginning. Month 1. $2,000. That was 4 years ago. My father, Frank, had called me, his voice heavy with a performative shame that I now recognized as a sales tactic. He said they were going to lose the legacy. He said he just needed a bridge until his investments paid off. There were no investments. I was the investment. I traced the columns down. Month 12. The boiler incident. I remembered that month vividly. I had a toothache that throbbed like a second heartbeat in my lower jaw. The dentist told me I needed a root canal. It would cost $1,200. 2 days later, my mother called, frantic. The lake house boiler had died. They were freezing. They were old. How could I let them suffer? So, I swallowed for ibuprofen, canceled my dental appointment, and wired $5,000 for a new heating system. I lost the tooth 3 months later. It was cheaper to pull it than to save it. I ran my tongue over the gap in my mouth now. A permanent physical receipt for their comfort. For years, I had asked myself why I did it. Why I let them bleed me dry while I clipped coupons. Looking at the numbers, the answer finally crystallized cold and sharp. It wasn't duty. It was a survival mechanism. I had trapped myself in the invisible logic of the unloved child. When you grow up knowing you aren't the favorite, you learn to become the necessary. You learn that affection is a transaction, and presence is a privilege you have to rent. I had convinced myself that utility was a form of security. I thought that if I made myself expensive enough to replace, they couldn't afford to discard me. I thought I was buying my seat at the Thanksgiving table. I thought I was paying insurance against abandonment. It is a subtle, terrifying chain that you forge yourself, link by checkbook link, believing it is a lifeline when it is actually a leash. I had spent 32 years trying to purchase a love that Brooke got for free just by existing. But the transaction was fraudulent. They had cashed the checks, but they had never delivered the goods. They had accepted my money for this month, $2,000 sent just yesterday, knowing full well the locksmith was already on his way. They waited for the transfer to clear before they fired me. I looked at the bottom of the spreadsheet. $101,000. That wasn't a gift. That wasn't family support. That was a venture capital investment in a failing business. And when a business takes your money and locks you out of the building, you don't cry about it. You audit them. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a clarity so absolute it felt like a drop in temperature. I didn't want their love anymore. I wanted a refund. I closed the spreadsheet and opened the county records database. If they wanted to talk about ownership, we were going to look at the deeds. I logged into my banking portal. My cursor hovered over the recurring transfer labeled family support. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I clicked cancel. The screen refreshed, confirming that the next payment, scheduled for the first of the month, would never arrive. It felt like cutting a wire on a bomb. The silence in the apartment deepened, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt safe. But canceling the payment was just the tourniquet. I needed to see the wound. I opened a new tab and navigated to the county clerk's public records database. If they had changed the locks, they asserted ownership. But I had been paying the mortgage directly for 4 years. I typed in my father's name, Frank Henderson. The search results populated instantly. There it was. The most recent document, filed 6 months ago. A quitclaim deed. I downloaded the PDF, my eyes scanning the legalese until I hit the only lines that mattered. Grantor, Frank and Patricia Henderson. Grantee, Brooke Henderson. Consideration, $1. The breath left my lungs in a sharp hiss. They hadn't just locked me out today. They had given the house to Brooke half a year ago. For 6 months, I had been paying the mortgage on a property my parents didn't even own anymore. I had sent $12,000 into a black hole, while Brooke played homeowner on my dime. This wasn't just familial ingratitude. This was theft. This was fraud. They had solicited funds for an asset they had already liquidated. I sat back, the cold light of the laptop screen illuminating my small, thrifted kitchen table. I had been playing the role of the dutiful daughter, sacrificing my own comfort to secure their retirement, while they were actively stripping me of assets. I wasn't a partner in this family. I was the mark in a long con. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me. It wasn't a text from my parents demanding an explanation for the canceled transfer. It was a message from my Uncle Gerald. Gerald was my father's younger brother, a man who usually sat quietly at the end of the table, nursing a beer and saying nothing. We rarely spoke. I unlocked the phone. There was no greeting, just a video file and a single line of text. You needed to see this. Stop paying. I pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed surreptitiously from lap height under a dining table. I recognized the tablecloth, the expensive linen one I had bought my mother for Christmas 2 years ago. The audio was loud, a cacophony of silverware clinking and laughter. It was a dinner party. A dinner party I hadn't been invited to. The camera angled up slightly, capturing my father, Frank, red-faced and beaming, holding a wine glass. She's reliable. I'll give her that. My father's voice boomed through my phone speakers. Like a good little cash cow. Laughter rippled around the table. I recognized Brooke's high, tinkling giggle. Don't be mean, Frank, my mother's voice chimed in, though she didn't sound scolded. She sounded amused. She's useful. She knows she doesn't really fit in with us, so she pays her dues. It's how she feels included. Let her write the checks. It keeps her busy. Brooke leaned into the frame, swirling her drink. I honestly don't know why she thinks she's saving the legacy, she said, smirking. She's so desperate to be the hero. It's kind of pathetic. But hey, at least the renovations are covered for next year. The video cut to black. I stared at the dark screen, my reflection staring back at me, pale and frozen. A whisper campaign. That's what this was. For years, I had sensed a distance, a coldness that I tried to bridge with money and service. I thought I was earning my way back into the fold. But they weren't distant because they were struggling. They were distant because they were laughing at me. They had created a narrative where I was the cold, desperate outsider trying to buy affection, while they were the benevolent family tolerating my presence as long as the checks cleared. They didn't just steal my money. They stole my dignity. They sat eating food I likely paid for in a house I was keeping warm, mocking the very sacrifice that made their comfort possible. I looked at Uncle Gerald's text again. You needed to see this. Stop paying. He was the unexpected ally, the crack in their wall of silence. He had broken the family code to hand me the weapon I needed. My hands, which had been shaking an hour ago, were now perfectly steady. The sadness was gone, burned away by a white-hot realization. I wasn't dealing with family. I was dealing with parasites. And you don't negotiate with parasites. You exterminate them. I saved the video. I backed it up to the cloud. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it The Audit. If they thought I was just a cash cow, they were about to learn what happens when the livestock breaks down the fence. I didn't sleep. I worked. I am a logistics coordinator by trade. My job is to organize chaos, to track shipments across oceans, to ensure that every container is accounted for and every tariff is paid. I know how to follow a paper trail. I know how to build a manifest. So that is what I did. I treated my family like a failing supply chain. I opened a fresh document and began to compile the evidence. I didn't just drag and drop files. I curated a narrative of exploitation. I started with the bank statements, highlighting every transfer to my father, Frank, and my mother, Patricia. $2,000 every first of the month for 48 months. $96,000. Then came the erratic, panic-induced requests. The $5,000 for the broken boiler. The $300 for groceries when my dad's pension was late. I screenshotted the text messages where they begged, wheedled, and guilt-tripped me, matching them to the timestamps of the wire transfers. I added the quitclaim deed I had downloaded, the one proving they had transferred the asset to Brooke while still billing me for its maintenance. I merged it all into a single, high-resolution PDF. I titled it simply, The Investment Report. It was a masterclass in forensic accounting. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a silent partner who had been embezzled. The grand total sat at the bottom of the final page, bold and black. $101,000. But I wasn't done. My phone buzzed again. It was Uncle Gerald. Since breaking the silence, he had become a fountain of dirty secrets. Call Mrs. Gable, his text read. She's the treasurer at St. Andrews. Ask her about the Widows and Orphans Fund. My stomach tightened. St. Andrews was the church my parents had attended for 30 years. It was where I was baptized. It was the center of their social universe. I found the number for the parish office and dialed. Mrs. Gable answered on the second ring. Her voice was sweet, elderly, and confused when I identified myself. Leah? She asked, her tone dropping to a hush. Oh, honey. I'm surprised to hear from you. Frank told us. Well, he said you wanted nothing to do with the church. Or him. The narrative. The whisper campaign. They hadn't just called me cold to the family, they had sold that story to God. I'm actually calling about my father's finances, I said, keeping my voice professional. I'm doing an audit of his accounts. Uncle Gerald mentioned he received support from the parish? Well, yes, Mrs. Gable stammered. Since you cut them off 4 years ago, the board voted to help. We give him a hardship stipend. It's not much, dear, just $1,000 a month. It's from the Emergency Relief Fund. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of my desk. $1,000 a month, I repeated. For 4 years? Yes. Frank was so heartbroken when he told us. He said you refused to help them keep the house. He said they were choosing between medicine and heat. I closed my eyes. While I was eating ramen to send them $2,000 a month, they were standing at the pulpit, weeping about my abandonment to collect another 1,000 from the collection plate. They were double-dipping. They were defrauding me, and they were defrauding a charity meant for actual destitute people. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I think you should check your email in about an hour. I'm going to send you some documentation that might clear up the timeline. I hung up. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. This wasn't just family drama. This was criminal fraud. My father had stolen $48,000 from his church by lying about my financial support. I added a new section to my PDF dossier. I labeled it, The Charity Fraud. I looked at the clock. It was 6 a.m. In 4 hours, Brooke was hosting her housewarming party at the lake house. The entire extended family would be there. The church elders would be there. My parents' neighbors would be there. They were expecting a celebration of Brooke's success. They were expecting a mimosa bar and a tour of the renovated kitchen. They weren't expecting an audit. I saved the file. I opened my email client. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel hesitation. I felt the cold, mechanical precision of a judge delivering a verdict. They wanted to talk about trust. They wanted to talk about who was reliable. I was about to show them exactly how reliable I could be. I poured a fresh cup of coffee. The steam rose in a thin, gray spiral, the only movement in my still apartment. It was 9:55 in the morning. 400 miles away, the driveway of the lake house would be filling up with luxury SUVs. My mother, Patricia, would be adjusting the hydrangeas on the porch, wearing her hosting smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. My father, Frank, would be pouring the first round of drinks, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch who had successfully secured his family's legacy. Brooke would be giving the grand tour, pointing out the granite countertops and the farmhouse sink, accepting compliments on a home she had purchased for $1. They were celebrating their victory. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully pruned the dead weight, me, from the family tree while keeping the fruit I had grown for them. I sat down at my laptop. The screen was bright, the cursor blinking in the recipient field of a new email. This wasn't a letter. It wasn't a plea for understanding. It was an invoice. I began to type the addresses. I didn't use a contact group. I typed them individually, savoring each name. Uncle Gerald, of course. Then the rest of the extended family, Aunt Sarah, Cousin Mike, the relatives who usually only sent Christmas cards. Then I moved to the church board. Mrs. Gable, the pastor, the deacons who had prayed over my father's financial hardship. Then the neighbors, the homeowners association president, my parents' bridge club. I added every single person who had ever looked at me with pity because my parents had told them I was cold. I added everyone who had ever praised Frank for his resilience. I added the entire audience they had spent 30 years curating. Subject: Closing the Bank of Leah, a final audit. I didn't write a long, emotional manifesto. Explanations are for people who are negotiating. I wasn't negotiating. I typed 3 sentences. To whom it may concern, attached is a full financial reconciliation of the support provided to Frank and Patricia Henderson over the last 48 months, alongside public records regarding the ownership transfer of the lake house property. Also attached is a video file that provides necessary context regarding the character of the beneficiaries. Please consider this my resignation as the family sponsor. Regards, Leah. I clicked the paperclip icon. I attached the PDF dossier, $101,000 of receipts, text messages, and legal deeds. Then I attached the video file Uncle Gerald had sent me. The file size was large, but the connection was fast. I watched the blue loading bar fill up. It looked like a fuse burning down. At 9:59, the upload was complete. I pictured the scene at the lake house. The laughter. The clinking glasses. The moment when phones in pockets and purses would start to buzz. Not all at once, but in a ripple. A chime here. A vibration there. Aunt Sarah checking her email because she was bored. Mrs. Gable checking hers because she was diligent. They would open it. They would see the numbers first. The sheer volume of money I had poured into keeping my parents afloat. Then they would see the deed, the proof that Frank and Patricia had gifted the house to Brooke while crying poverty to the church. And then they would play the video. They would hear my father's voice, clear and booming, calling me a cash cow. They would hear my mother laughing about my desperation. They would hear the church's charity case, mocking the daughter who was paying his bills. The clock on my laptop flipped to 10 o'clock. I didn't hesitate. I didn't take a deep breath. I didn't close my eyes. I looked right at the screen, my fingers steady on the trackpad. Click. The message, sent. The status bar vanished. The email was gone, hurtling through the digital ether, landing in 64 inboxes simultaneously. It was done. The grenade was in the room. I sat back in my chair. I expected to feel fear. I expected to feel the crushing weight of knowing I had just nuked my own family. But all I felt was the warmth of the coffee cup in my hands. I took a sip. It was perfect. I waited. It wouldn't take long. Silence is heavy, but the truth is louder. The first reaction was a phone call. My father. The ringtone shattered the quiet of my apartment, loud and angry. I watched the name flash on the screen. Frank Henderson. I didn't answer. He called again immediately. Then my mother. Then Brooke. Then a number I didn't recognize, probably a cousin or a neighbor. My phone vibrated so hard it walked itself across the table. I let it ring for 5 minutes. I wanted them to panic. I wanted them to feel the ground dissolving under their feet, the way I had felt when I read that text about the locks. They were scrambling. They were trying to contain the damage, but you can't contain a digital blast radius. The email was already open on 64 screens. The video was playing. The numbers were being read. At 10:15, my father called for the 6th time. This time, I picked up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Leah. His voice was a ragged scream, distorted by bad reception and pure rage. What have you done? Are you insane? You ruined her party. Everyone is leaving. Mrs. Gable is asking for the police. Behind him, I could hear the chaos. My mother sobbing, that high, keen wail she used when she wanted sympathy. Brooke shouting at someone to stop filming. The sound of car doors slamming. I didn't ruin anything, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. I just balanced the books. You ungrateful little. He choked, the words strangled by his own fury. After everything we did for you, you think this makes you smart? You're nothing without us. I'll sue you. I'll take you for everything you have. You have nothing to sue me for, Dad, I said. I sent receipts. Truth isn't defamation. And honestly, looking at the numbers, it seems like I'm the one who has everything. Please. He shifted gears instantly, the rage collapsing into a desperate, wheedling whine. It was pathetic. Leah, please. Fix this. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were angry and made it up. The church, they're talking about charges. They'll put me in jail. Then you better call a lawyer, I said. And I suggest you don't use the money you stole from them to pay for it. Leah, wait. The subscription is canceled, Frank. I hung up. Then I blocked his number. Then my mother's. Then Brooke's. I sat there in the silence, waiting for the guilt to hit. I waited for the old programming to kick in, the voice that said I was a bad daughter, that I had gone too far. But it didn't come. Instead, I thought about the illusions of power. My parents had walked through life with their heads held high, treating me like a servant, because they believed their status was real. They thought they were the kings of their little kingdom. But their power wasn't intrinsic. It was rented. It was purchased with my money. They weren't strong. They were just well-funded. And the moment the funding stopped, they didn't just struggle, they collapsed. They had no resilience, no character, no backup plan. They were hollow structures held up by my scaffolding. And I had just kicked it out. It wasn't cruel. It was gravity. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city was moving, indifferent to the implosion of the Henderson family legacy. People were walking dogs. Cars were stopping at red lights. The world hadn't ended. It had just corrected itself. My phone buzzed one last time before I could block the unknown numbers. It was a text from Uncle Gerald. They're all gone, it read. Brooke is locking herself in the bedroom. Frank is throwing up in the yard. It's over, kid. You did good. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile, but it was real. I turned off my phone. I didn't need to hear the rest. The collapse was their problem now. I had a life to start living. Justice moves slower than revenge, but it digs deeper. The fallout wasn't a singular event. It was a long, slow landslide. The church board didn't accept Frank's tears or his performative repentance. They accepted the police report. My father was charged with fraud. He avoided prison time only by agreeing to a plea deal that required full restitution of the $48,000. But Frank didn't have $48,000. He didn't have anything. He had spent the last 4 years spending my money and pretending it was his pension. That left Brooke, my sister, the homeowner, for $1. She sat in the lake house for 3 weeks before the reality of property taxes and utility bills hit her. She was a lifestyle entrepreneur, which is a fancy way of saying she had no income. Without my monthly subsidies, the estate wasn't an asset, it was a liability. Uncle Gerald brokered the peace. He sat them down and laid out the options: sell the house and pay Leah what she is owed, or face a lawsuit that will leave you bankrupt and homeless. They sold. The sanctuary, without negative energy, was on the market for less than a month. The proceeds went to pay back the church, pay their legal fees, and finally, to write a check to me. It wasn't the full amount I had lost over the years, but it was substantial. Gerald handed it to me in a white envelope. He didn't say much. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the books were finally balanced. I didn't save the money. I didn't put it in a retirement fund. I used it to buy a life. I found a small cabin 2 hours north. It isn't a lakefront estate. It doesn't have granite countertops or a wraparound deck. It has creaky floorboards and it smells like cedar and rain. But when I turn the key in the lock, it opens. It opens because it belongs to me. My name is on the deed. Just mine. There are no investors, no sponsors, no hidden clauses. I'm sitting on the porch now. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the trees. It is quiet here. For the first time in 32 years, the silence doesn't feel like I'm holding my breath. It feels like exhaling. I know there are people listening to this who are still holding their breath. I know there are people who feel like they are standing on the edge of their own families, looking in through a window at a dinner they paid for but aren't allowed to eat. I know the ache of being the necessary one, the one who is loved only as long as they are useful. I want to tell you something that took me a lifetime to learn. You are not a utility. You are not an infrastructure project for other people to build their lives on. The guilt you feel when you think about leaving? That isn't your conscience speaking. That is their programming. They installed that button so they could press it whenever they needed a deposit. Walking away doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you free. Family isn't defined by whose blood you carry. It is defined by how they treat you when you have nothing left to give. If their love is conditional on your transaction, let the payment fail. Let the subscription expire. It will be scary. It will be messy. They will scream, and they will blame you for the collapse of the structures you were holding up. Let them. You were never the foundation. You were the prisoner. I take a sip of my coffee. The air is cool. My phone is inside, silent. I don't check it. I don't need to. The only approval I need is right here, in the quiet of a home that I built, on ground that I own. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to buy your own freedom, share this video. You are not a bank and you are not alone.